What can destroy almost any marriage? The answer is simple. It is a temptation before anything. This is one of the reasons for the breakdown of all marriages, when a person wants to do something that he is forbidden and not desirable to do. I glanced at my wife of 5 years and said, "Aaron, it's either him or me. No middle ground." She was sitting beside my nominal boss, Plato Giannis, and had been holding his well-groomed hand until I spoke. At my words, she pulled hers away. A mix of worry and fear crossed her attractive face as she shook her head in disbelief, making her blonde hair shimmer in the soft lighting. "It's just for the weekend," she said. "By Monday, everything will be back to normal. Can't you just have a little fun with Elle?" Ella Logan, whose real name was Ellen Johnson, was seated next to me and had been trying to seduce me for the past few hours. She was stunning, with glossy dark hair and a body that could easily be among the best in the world, especially if you're into curves. And I definitely was. There were also rumors that she was a high-end escort. It was all part of Plato's game. Aaron and I had been invited to this island for the weekend, under the pretense that he wanted to get to know me better. I was a published author, and he had bought the company that published my work about 3 months ago. The whole weekend was planned so that Plato could sleep with my wife. I was a writer of mid-level mystery and thriller novels. My main character was Rick Rocker. Sometimes he solved the mysteries of a locked room, and sometimes he jumped off a cliff to escape from madmen. His personal life was just as exciting. He could instantly have fun with beautiful women. Rick was also a martial arts expert. Overall, he had a lot of talents. He was a fantastic character, almost unrelated to reality, but the book sold pretty well. But the publisher had several more important and better-selling authors. I was just the one with the attractive wife who had caught Plato's attention. The two of them met at a welcome dinner and dance hosted by Plato, Mr. G, for his group of writers and editors. It was a grand event, and Aaron was duly impressed. She was particularly taken with Mr. G after they danced together several times. He was a charming man, 10 years older than Aaron's 28. With dark, slightly long hair, he was a large man, 6 feet 2 inches and a solid 210 pounds. As I watched them dance, I noticed how light on his feet he was. The two of them returned to our table when the band took a break, and Mr. G said, "You have a lovely wife, Donald." "She's a great dancer." I nodded. My lack of response seemed to catch him off guard for a moment. Then he said, "Well, I must attend to my other guests." "A pleasure, madam." Aaron smiled and replied, "Likewise, Plato." I glanced at her, surprised at how quickly she'd gone from Mr. G to Plato. I asked, "Are you impressed with my boss?" "Oh, absolutely. He's quite the charmer." She flashed me a mischievous grin. "Well, let's see whose wife he flirts with next, shall we?" It turned out to be one of the editor's wives, and there were 3 more throughout the evening. That was a month ago. "My name is Donald Lake. No pseudonym needed. I'm 5'11" inches tall and weigh 170 pounds. I have curly brown hair and blue eyes, and I'm 30 years old. I'm in good shape and athletic. Erin is also very fit. She practices fencing, a sport that requires skill and coordination. That's how we met, at a fencing class she was teaching. I was there doing research for Rick, who was going to have a duel with an épée in the next book, a real swashbuckler. I always do thorough research before writing the Rocker series. It was one of my standout features. Rick never did anything I hadn't tried myself. I climbed my way up a challenging path as a writer. After graduating from high school, I didn't pursue further formal education. Even back then, and since I was 10, I knew I was a writer. Throughout school, I wrote story after story. 2 of them were published while I was still in high school, though only in obscure literary journals. I considered myself a serious writer, but after graduation, I had to make a living. I ended up working as an auto mechanic, which I enjoyed, but it didn't pay much. So I turned to writing thrillers. To my surprise, one sold, then another, and eventually more. I landed a deal with my current publisher after submitting the first Rick Rocker novel. They paired me with an editor, Sally Baker. We hit it off right away. She's charming, but very married and had young kids at the time. It was while working on the second Rocker book that I met Erin. I finished the book with her advice on a sword duel scene. We went on a few dates, and soon ended up in bed. We were amazing together. There was an instant connection, and I think we both felt that excitement. At the time, Erin was running her own music store. She came from a wealthy background which helped her secure loans from a family trust to support the early stages of her business. The store had two sections. One sold a wide range of instruments, and the other offered recorded music and sheet music. Fencing was just a hobby for her. She was 23 when we got married, and I was as happy as I ever thought I could be. We had plans for children, and we were going to start soon. But then my publisher was sold to Mr. G, or as we called him, Plato, and he passed the company over to Erin. One day Erin came home all excited. "Donnie, Plato has invited us to his private island for the weekend after next." I gave her a long look. "You mean Mr. G? Well, why are you telling me this and not him?" "Oh, I bumped into him last week. We had lunch and I gave him a tour of the store. He called today to invite us. He says he wants to get to know his authors better. I'm sure he'll reach out to you soon." "But my question is, has he already contacted you? And how close has this contact been?" She went pale. "It's not like that, Donnie. You're being paranoid." "No, I'm not. Tell me why you didn't mention the lunch and the store visit before today. It happened last week, right?" She looked away. "Okay, Donald. He did make a move on me, but I shut him down. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to cause trouble. He owns the company." "And now you're excited about going to his island?" "I've heard about that place." "How many people will be there?" "Just us. He has a special friend who will be there too. And the staff, of course. This is his way of getting to know you." "Seems to me it's more about getting to know you. Really well. How convenient." "I can handle it." "I'm sure you can." "Stop it. It's going to be fine. You'll see." "I'm going to decline the invitation, Erin. It's just too risky for us." "Oh, Donnie, no, please, it'll be fun." "Sorry." She sulked for the rest of the evening. The next day, I called the head office, asked for Mr. G, and he called me back within 15 minutes. He greeted me, saying, "Hello, Donald. I'm looking forward to our weekend on the island. I'm going to decline, Mr. G. I don't feel comfortable with this. Apparently my wife knew about it, but I didn't. In fact, she had lunch with you and didn't tell me. She mentioned you made a move on her and was afraid I'd react badly if I found out. And she was right. Donald, I admire Erin in many ways. She's very attractive, but I can handle that. She's also a businesswoman like myself. And you're one of my top writers. My goal is just to get to know both of you better." "Sorry, Mr. G, that's not happening." "I'm really sorry you feel this way, Donald. I hope you'll reconsider. I'll keep the weekend open." With that, we ended the conversation. A few hours later, as I was wrapping up the next Rick book, I got a call from my agent, Brock Levine. He said, "Don, I heard you turned down Mr. G's invitation." "Why?" "How do you even know about that, Brock?" "The VP of sales mentioned it. They really want you to go." "And what happens if I don't?" "They might not fully promote the new book. It could hurt your sales, and mine, since I take a percentage." "Did they threaten you directly?" "Not exactly, but the message was clear. Mr. G is tough. I'll get back to you, Brock." After hanging up, I emailed Sally the completed manuscript with some instructions. She called me later to discuss it, but in the meantime I did some deep research on Plato Giannis and his island. The island was named Hedonismos, the Greek word for pleasure. Essentially, Pleasure Island. As I dug deeper, I discovered several stories about questionable activities happening there, along with references to 2 divorce cases citing the island. However, these stories were mostly from tabloids. There were also some photos of Mr. G with women, 2 of whom were married. The whole thing left me feeling uneasy. I pulled up a satellite image of the island on Google Maps to get a better look. The island was about 2 miles long and 1 mile wide, located off the coast of North Carolina, amidst a group of islands known for golf and beach activities. It faced south and was shielded from harsh weather. There were 2 docks, several buildings, including a large house, tennis courts, and a pool. Odd considering the island had beautiful beaches. I downloaded detailed images of the place and found a topographical map too. It seemed that to reach the island, you would need either a good-sized boat or a seaplane, neither of which I had. But I knew people who did. That evening, Erin arrived home on time, which was unusual for a Friday. She seemed cheerful when she walked in. I had prepared a large chicken salad for dinner with some white wine. She went upstairs to change. While we were eating, Erin said, "I hear you might have reconsidered the island trip." I glanced at her and asked, "Where did that come from?" "Plato mentioned that you might change your mind." "During lunch?" "No, silly. He's in New York and we're here in good old Virginia. He called. He has a place in McLean. How do you know he's in New York?" "Don't be paranoid, Donnie. He brought it up. He said if we agree, he could arrange for his plane to pick us up at National." "But we're not agreeing, Erin. I haven't changed my stance." "Seriously?" "Donald Lake, you're so stubborn. Erin, you can go. I wouldn't enjoy myself because I'd be worried we might end up divorcing. You'll sleep with him, right?" "I wouldn't go without you, Don. How could you think that? If I went alone, anything could happen." "Would happen. When you got back, we wouldn't sleep together again. Donnie, I can't deny that I'm attracted to him, but you and I are still on fire together. I wouldn't risk that, I promise." "That's easy to say. No trust?" "None at all?" I replied. "Right now, my trust is running low. After all, I am a writer." She stood up abruptly, spilling her wine. "Damn, look what you made me do." I started laughing at her, and she quickly realized how ridiculous she sounded and joined in. This laughter turned into some hugs and kisses, which led to a trip upstairs. That lasted a whole hour. Dessert was waiting. While we were lying in bed, Erin said, "I wouldn't take this chance for the sake of a billionaire, I promise." I noticed that she seemed to believe we were actually going to the island. Otherwise, why take the risk? I replied, "All right, it's decided then." She became tense but didn't speak. I asked, "Why are you so eager to go on this trip?" "Be honest, not trying to persuade me." She remained silent for a while before responding. It sounded exciting. Being with such an important and influential man. Sorry, I didn't mean with in that sense. I meant socially. I said, "Erin, I did some research on him. He was born into wealth. Sure, he has made a lot more money, but he had a significant advantage from the start, and he pursues women. Women like you." She answered, "Okay. Still, I think it would turn out well and be fun." I reflected on this. We were about to start trying to have a family. If Erin were to cheat, this would be the time. And if she did, I'd prefer to know now rather than after we have children. I loved her. She was smart, lively, and incredibly attractive. But she also needed to be honest, and now I was having doubts. I said, "All right, Erin, we can go. But here's a warning. If you end up with that guy, we're finished. No going back. Understand?" "Yes, I understand." "I'm so happy we can do this," she replied. I decided that this warning was the final one. She was either a deserving wife or not. Temptation would be the test. Time would reveal the truth. The next day, I accepted the invitation and made some plans with a friend in case of an emergency. I also checked the cell phone coverage on the island. It was available, but I included a satellite phone just in case. We arrived at a modest airport via a small plane from National, where a black man named Simon greeted us. He took us to a dock, and we boarded a boat that featured a comfortable cabin and a powerful engine. Another man, Charlie, was at the helm, navigating us to the island in about 40 minutes. Throughout the journey, Aaron and I admired the ocean and nearby islands. Simon explained our location and gave an overview of the activities available on the island. He was a friendly, larger-than-me, muscular individual with a warm smile and hearty laugh. As we approached the dock on the island's northern side, Aaron took the lead. Simon remarked, "You don't seem very happy about this trip, Mr. Lake." "Please call me Don. I have my reservations." "Have you been working on the island for a while?" I responded. 6 years. "For Mr. G," he answered. "Then I suppose you understand why I have my doubts." "Why are you here then, if you're so concerned?" "To observe what unfolds. Are you also acting as his bodyguard?" "Yes, in case things turn physical." "Well, he's a large man. I'm confident he can handle himself." "Indeed. You could say I'm back in action. A couple of times things went wrong, but I wasn't needed then. Looking at you, perhaps. I'll be prepared. That's my job. Are you armed?" "Number, I do have a knife, but knives are easy to come by." "Are there any guns on the island?" "No, they're not allowed. I believe that was mentioned in the information you received." "Yeah, I didn't have much faith in that. I'm not very trusting these days. No guns. I assure you no firearms will be necessary, whatever happens." The boat docked securely, and Simon, along with a young man on the pier, tied it up. Simon helped Aaron off the boat, and I jumped ashore. Simon seemed a bit uneasy about that. I walked with Aaron toward a large house, as Simon had directed. Mr. G greeted us as we approached the entrance. He was dressed casually in swim trunks and a sleeveless shirt. Accompanying him was Elle, the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. I had noticed her when I realized who else would be joining us, which is how I recognized her as Ellen Johnson from Johnstown. She served as the semi-official hostess on the island and at several of Mr. G's residences. There was a time when she was seen with other distinguished men, but not much anymore. It seemed Mr. G had some sort of exclusive arrangement with her. Mr. G extended his hand for a handshake, and Elle hugged Aaron. Then Mr. G hugged Aaron, and Elle hugged me. She smelled wonderful and felt lovely. Her lips brushed against my ear during the hug. They escorted us into a spacious room and offered us beverages. It was 1 o'clock, and we had only eaten a light meal on the plane. Nevertheless, a small buffet was laid out for us. I politely declined the offered drinks and chose sparkling water instead, while Aaron opted for wine. Both of us took modest servings from the buffet. As we were doing so, Mr. G inquired about my latest book. "I sent it to Sally last week. It should arrive on schedule, I believe." "Oh, absolutely. I know you're always punctual, Donald. Sometimes even ahead of time." He grinned. Ella asked, "What's the story about?" "I've read all your previous novels." "It's a suspense thriller that involves mountain climbing, piloting small airplanes, and includes a romantic subplot." Ella replied, "I'm really looking forward to it. Maybe I could get an early preview." Mr. G responded, "We'll see, darling." He then turned to Aaron. "My dear, how's the music business going?" "Going great. Maybe I should have said, at a crescendo." There was some laughter. I added, "I think Marjorie's latest book is going to do well. Marjorie Wright, who writes serious fiction, still manages to sell a lot of copies." "Yes, she's rising up our sales charts, but Donald, she's still nowhere near you or Morgan." Morgan wrote romance novels under the pen name Belle Starling and was the top-selling author in our company. Morgan just churns them out, I remarked teasingly. Mr. G chuckled. That's exactly what he does, which really boosts my profits. I reviewed your contract last week. You owe us one more book. Yes, that's right. It's due by Christmas Eve, I believe. 9 months away, but it's progressing well. Ella asked, Do you manage both types of writing? Yes. Sometimes the thrillers need a break, so I switch genres. The next book is a mystery set in an English village. I did my research when we were there last summer. Elle continued, Plato has been very complimentary about your sales. Each new book sells better than the previous one. Aaron added, He's building a strong readership, which is great for our future. My store usually just breaks even. Elle inquired, But you have family money? Yes, it was inherited. So far, after getting the store up and running, I've let it operate on its own. Mr. G suddenly stood up. If you've finished lunch, let's go for a swim. He dashed out the door. Elle said, If you have your swimwear, I'll show you your room so you can change. The three of us went upstairs, and Elle led us to a spacious bedroom with a queen-sized bed and an ensuite bathroom. She closed the door. We changed into our swimwear. I wore a regular pair of trunks, but Aaron chose a revealing pink bikini. I commented, That's a bit much, isn't it? Who are you trying to impress? I do want to look good. Elle is so beautiful. No more than you, darling. She didn't appreciate my tone, but stayed silent. When we came back downstairs, Elle was wearing an electric blue bikini, just as revealing as Aaron's. I was completely smitten, with both of them. We headed out and made our way to a beach on the island's southern edge. A wooden path lined the shore. Mr. G had already entered the water, swimming past the breaking waves. Aaron remarked, I'm not going that far out. Same here, Ella replied, shivering as she spoke. I plunged through the surf, surfaced, and swam over to where Mr. G was using the freestyle stroke. I joined him. He was a strong swimmer, especially given his build. However, my physique was better suited for swimming, allowing me to maintain an easy pace and occasionally switch up my strokes. I kept moving forward until he seemed to grow tired. He began to turn back, and I followed suit. As we reached the beach, a large wave swept him off his feet. I hurried over and helped him up. He was coughing up seawater and sand. I held him steady as we made our way out of the water. I noticed his legs were wobbly, probably from overexerting himself during our swim competition. Nevertheless, he quickly regained his composure and declined my assistance. I'm fine. That wave just took me by surprise. We approached the women relaxing on the sun loungers. I asked, Who wants to go for a swim? Elle s'est immédiatement levée. She lifted her hand, causing her top to slip slightly. Me! She exclaimed, running toward the waves. I glanced at Aaron, who shook her head. I chased after Elle. The view from behind was stunning. She dove into the surf like an Olympian and swam beyond the breakers. I followed her lead. She surpassed Mr. G in swimming, which amazed me. We swam side by side for a while until she shouted, Turn around, and immediately did it. Her figure caught my attention. I let her move 12 feet away and watched her from the sidelines. She switched to backstroke swimming, and when she did, I was delighted. Since backstroke was one of my specialties, I joined her and swam alongside her. We covered a considerable distance before she announced, I have to go, and headed for the shore. I stopped briefly to admire the view. I came out of the water. Aaron and Mr. G were nowhere to be seen, but Else was directly watching me. She remarked, How can you be so energetic after such swims? Are you Superman? I chuckled. There's only one way to find out. She took a step forward, but stopped. We can't do it here even if we wanted to, she said. Then she turned and ran. She wasn't nearly as fast on land as she was in the water. I easily caught up with her and we went up on deck together. The other two girls were nowhere to be seen. I wondered if this had happened before. Ellie looked at me. So you really do what you write about? Yeah. Well, I can't jump over buildings, but I'm trying to figure out if what Rick is doing can be at least a little plausible. Ellie looked at me intently. She was one of those women who knew exactly what kind of power they had. I said, Ellie, F off. I'm married to an amazing woman, and I want it to stay that way. Please don't do this. Just don't. Oh my God. Ellie laughed. A writer who has no words. Oh my God. I replied, let's see what these two are up to, shall we? Does it bother you? What is it? She asked. Oh, yes, it is. Please, Ellie, I want you to know that I won't. Sleeping with you this weekend, no matter what Aaron decides. If it comes to that, I'll leave. And I'll probably regret saying that for a long time. I smiled at her. Keep in mind, Donald, I'm not that easy to get rid of. She reached out and patted me just once before entering the house. I waited a few minutes before following her. I didn't see anyone when I went upstairs to change, but when I got to our room, I heard the sound of water in the shower. As soon as I heard that, the noise stopped. There were no voices. Erin opened the door wrapped in a towel and was amazed to see me. She asked, Has Ellie gotten to you yet? Number. Please understand, Erin. I'm not going with Ellie, and I hope you're not going with Mr. G. We talked about it, and the situation has not changed. What were you two doing while we were swimming? He showed me the pool and the tennis court, and there's a gym downstairs. No jokes? It was hard for me to believe that something could happen, because it would be too risky. They had no idea how long Ellie and I would be gone, and I was sure they were watching us while we were swimming. No, he was a gentleman. Good. But sooner or later he'll start following you, and you know it. Yes, and she will haunt you. He has as much chance of getting me as she has of getting you. She grinned at me. It's not very encouraging, but I won't, and you better not do it either. Or what? We have already discussed this. Nothing has changed. She replied, Drinks and snacks at 5. Let's have some fun now. She dropped the towel. I must admit I was still impressed by Elle. I had fun with her. When we finished, we suddenly realized that the windows were open. Erin said, Oh well. After all, we are married. I looked out the window and saw Ellie sitting on a chaise longue about 20 feet away from me. She looked up, smiled, waved, and then reached for her shorts. I quickly moved away from the window. Erin noticed how I reacted to her. Erin scoffed at me. You have to beg her to back off. Otherwise, you don't stand a chance. I've already tried, but it doesn't seem to help. I think Plato instructed her to do this in order to sleep with me. It's all so weird. But you have to admit, it's intriguing. Erin, I promise I won't do this, but you definitely helped me just now. She looked at me. Of course, we can have fun every 2 hours. It might work. Maybe. She grabbed me, mine, before turning away to get dressed. We made our way to the main room dressed casually. I opted for Docker shorts and a collared shirt, while Erin chose a dress and let her hair down, pairing it with high-heeled sandals. She looked stunning, without a doubt. When we arrived, Mr. G was enjoying a beer. He greeted me with, Hi, Donald. How was your swim with Elle? It was great, Mr. G. She's a skilled swimmer. One of her many talents. Just call me Plato. Sure, that's a well-known name. I like it. He was quite the notable figure. My father, may he rest in peace, loved reading about him. Elle entered the room, also dressed in a stylish outfit and heels. Although her dress appeared modest, it didn't come across that way on her. I could tell Erin felt a bit uncertain. I assumed this was part of the act. Elle would overshadow Erin, who would then seek validation by trying to win over Plato. I approached Erin and wrapped my arm around her shoulders. Plato remarked, We have wine, mixed drinks, beer, and some pretzels. Pretzels are my favorite. He was nibbling on one as he spoke. The four of us talked for a bit, and then Elle took me to show me the gym. It was quite impressive, with excellent equipment. I asked, "Does Plato use this?" "He lifts weights," she replied, pointing to a bench with a heavy barbell already set up. I lay down on the bench and carefully lifted the weight off the stand, completing 5 repetitions before placing it back. Ella was right above me, watching intently. She said, "He only does 3 before taking a break." I noticed she was actually breathing heavily. I lifted the bar again and did 8 more reps before lowering it. I noticed, "Everyone has their strengths, and you have so many of them. Do you know what my role should be this weekend?" "Drive me crazy so Plato can have fun with Aaron?" "That's right. This has happened before. I always complete a task even if it doesn't give me much pleasure. But I think it will be more than pleasant with you," she said with a dazzling smile. "If I beg you, will you stop?" I asked sincerely, but she seemed to think I was joking. "No, but I'll enjoy watching you beg," she replied, climbing the stairs. I waited before following her. The 3 of them were gathered together, chatting in the main room, but fell silent when I entered. Plato offered, "Would you like a drink, Donald? How about a beer?" I glanced at the bar, then walked behind it to grab an unopened bottle of Corona, which I opened. The others were drinking wine. We continued our conversation until I asked, "Have you all finished your scheming, or should I step outside?" This question created an awkward pause. Elle observed the other 2, focusing mostly on Aaron. Aaron looked over at Plato, who responded, "Well, no secrets. I ... At that moment, Simon walked in to announce that dinner was ready. We headed to the dining room where a buffet was set up with dishes arranged for self-service. We were seated at one end of a large table. Water had been poured, but I was drinking my beer and opted not to have any water. The interruption helped lighten the tense atmosphere I had created, and we began chatting casually about politics and baseball. Plato was a Yankees fan, while Aaron and I supported the Orioles and Nationals. Ellie, being from Johnstown, liked the Pirates. Simon served a dessert, tiramisu, but I decided to skip it. Plato seemed to notice my choice. "No dessert? It's really good. I need to watch my waistline." "Come on. You have no body fat. I saw you swim. You haven't touched any water, only beer." "Plato, as I mentioned to my wife before we arrived, my trust tank is empty. Can you blame me?" Aaron interjected, "You really think they'd prohibited substances you?" "That's so absurd. Don't think like that, Donald." I smiled at her and slid the glass of water and tiramisu over to Plato. "Go ahead. Eat and drink, my friend." Plato remained expressionless for a moment, then said, "Simon." When Simon arrived, Plato instructed, "Clear the table, please." Simon noticed the repositioned water and dessert. Without a word, he picked up the water glass that had been mine, along with the untouched tiramisu, and carried them away. Ella suggested, "Shall we head to the patio? There'll be music and we can dance." Aaron and Plato stayed silent. I stood up and offered my arm to Elle, escorting her to the patio. Once we arrived, she turned to me and said, "You really made a point with the food and water. Do you honestly think he'd prohibited substances you?" "Do you?" "Maybe. I wouldn't have thought so, but he didn't touch either of them. And then he had his guy take them away." The other 2 stepped out as soft music began to play. I walked over to Aaron, took her by the elbow, and gently led her away from Plato, guiding her to the open floor. We started dancing. She was usually a great dancer, but at first she seemed a little tense. Gradually she relaxed. She leaned into me, whispered softly in my ear, "I love you, Donnie. Always." "I love you too, Aaron," I replied. We continued dancing. When the song ended, we returned to the table where Plato and Elle were sitting. As the music resumed, Elle stood up and extended her hand towards me. She led me onto the dance floor. We danced, and I noticed Plato was now dancing with Aaron. Elle was possibly the perfect distraction. Her delicate fragrance and curvy figure put me in some kind of trance. Every time she worked her charm, I couldn't help but respond, and this time was no different. I saw Plato put his hands on Aaron, and she didn't seem to push them away. I broke up with Ellie. Then I closed a small distance between myself, Aaron, and Plato, just standing there and watching them. Aaron noticed this and tried to move away from Plato, but he wouldn't let her go. She snuggled up to him and said, "I don't want any trouble, Plato. Let me go." He did so, but took her hand and led her back to the table. Ellie followed me, and we sat down. She sat very close to me, while Aaron held Plato's hand as they sat together. Plato said, "I'm really disappointed in you, Donald. Ellie is an amazing lover. She could give you one of the most vivid and pleasant experiences in your life, but you refuse her. I have a wife, no deals." That's how we started. I turned to Aaron and said, "It's either him or me. There can be no middle ground." She let go of his hand, but looked at me and said, "It's just for the weekend. By Monday, everything will be back to normal. Can't you just have fun with Ellie?" I stared at her. "Are you really going to do this? Seriously? Would you do that knowing it would end us?" "No. I don't understand why that would be, but I'm not going to do that." I reached out and she took my hand. I pulled her to me and kissed her. Then I stepped back with tears in my eyes. My voice cracked as I squeezed out the words that tore me apart. "The fact that you slept with him means that everything is over between us. It's over between us." I turned and headed for the stairs. She screamed, "No, Donnie, no!" I reached the top, grabbed the bag I had packed earlier, and went down the back fire escape. I made a call, then jogged away into the darkness, tears streaming down my face. As I ran, I could still hear her screaming. About 20 minutes later, I heard the plane. It touched down near the south dock and taxied over. My friend, Todd Jacobs, was the pilot. I was heading toward the plane when Plato and Simon appeared. Plato yelled, "Oh no, you bastard! You're not running away. You need to stay and calm your wife down." He came charging at me. I stood on the dock while Plato, clearly out of control and in no condition to fight, stormed toward me. Simon kept his distance, likely because Todd was pointing a pistol at him. I shoved Plato into the water. He flailed around, screaming, "You're fired, you idiot! Do you hear me? Fired!" I boarded the plane and Todd taxied us out. We flew to a small lake near Dulles where he had a car waiting for me. After paying him for his service, I drove home to Alexandria. The drive was dark and lonely. When I arrived, the house was just as dark. I let myself in and looked around. There were photos of us from happier times and of our families. Overwhelmed, I sank into my chair, staring blankly into the distance. I must have fallen asleep there because at 8 in the morning I was woken by the sound of a car outside. Looking out, I saw Erin stepping out of a rental car. She grabbed her bag, unlocked the door, and walked inside. We just stood there looking at each other. She looked disheveled, probably no better than I did. Then she spoke, "In my entire life, I've never screwed up this badly. I never will again. Never. I don't want to lose you, Donnie." I shrugged my shoulders. "Erin, seriously, what did you expect when you let Plato sleep with you? Did you really think that I could just ignore it because of Ellie?" "I was so stupid, Donnie. Really stupid." "Okay, then tell me, did you and Plato plan this?" She looked down. "Not really. He offered to trade when we arrived. And, to be honest, I had a feeling that this could happen, even earlier. I thought I'd just say no, and that would be the end of it. But you didn't say no. You agreed. Only if you go with Ellie. I saw how much she influenced you when she was around. And then what happened? Did you think we could just go back to our marriage, have kids and all that, knowing that we can't trust each other anymore? I took it as just a moment, a pause during which both of us, we had an incredible experience. I smiled at her. I understand why you thought my experience with Ellie would be first-rate, but why did you decide that Plato would be better than me? I liked him. He's older, bossy, and knew exactly how to get my attention. I never thought he was better than you, just different. So, Aaron, how do I know it won't happen again? There are a lot of guys like Plato in the world, and he's still around. I wasn't going to cheat, Donnie. Everything was fine in front of your eyes. I just thought you'll agree, but now, after you turned her down, I know you wouldn't do that. Not if you refused her. Yeah, well, I don't know. To me, you are no longer the woman I met and married. She wouldn't be courting another guy like that. Donnie, let's just do it. Let's see where this leads. You know we've always had great intimacy. We'll both miss it. We can keep this to ourselves while you spend the rest of your time not trusting me. She took me upstairs. The only thing we've always had, and probably always will have, is an absolute attraction to each other. As soon as we get into bed, everything falls into place. So I let her come home. 10 years later. I was picking up the kids from the school bus at 3:15. Jessica was 8, Robert was 6, and Ellen, who wasn't in school yet, was 3. I was a stay-at-home dad and a writer, but I had a kind woman who helped out, allowing me to focus on my work. It took over a year before I trusted Erin enough to let her stop using birth control. But once she did, it sent our intimacy life into overdrive. The thought of getting her pregnant really excited us both. I finished my contract with my old publisher, and Sally and I moved to a new one. The first book I wrote was based on our island adventure, loosely based on the truth anyway. Okay, I might have exaggerated a bit. I had to hang from a plane's pontoon, fight off Simon and his henchmen, and climb aboard the plane. Oh, and the wife character was prohibited substances to make her desire the villain. But in the end, the villain got thrown into the ocean, and that's what really mattered. The book was a huge success, and I landed a movie deal which also included 3 of my earlier works. Plato wouldn't have much to complain about with the semi-fictional new book, where he was portrayed as Socrates. If he tried, the truth of the events would probably leave him embarrassed. Erin now owns 2 stores. They bring in some income, but I earn much more. Before fully reconciling, she signed a post-nuptial agreement, which binds us both. No infidelity allowed. As the school year began, I was walking the 2 oldest kids home when a small red sports car pulled into our driveway. Out stepped an incredible pair of legs, followed by the rest of the most gorgeous woman in the world. Ellen smiled and waved to the kids, who ran up to her shouting, "Auntie Ellen, Auntie Ellen." She scooped them up and doted on them. Young Ellen greeted her at the door when she walked into the house. I poured her some seltzer, her favorite, and said, "Erin will be home soon. I made a hearty salad, and your room is ready. But that's another story entirely."